General Sani Abacha, Nigeria's military ruler from 1993 until his death in 1998, had a complex legacy of commendable achievements and significant controversies. On the positive side, Abacha's regime implemented commendable economic policies and initiated infrastructural projects to varying degrees of success. On the flip side, however, his regime was marked by significant human rights abuses, lack of political freedom, repression, and corruption. During his regime, reports of widespread human rights abuses, including arbitrary arrest, torture, and extrajudicial killing of political opponents and activists, were a common occurrence. In this edition of History Media, we look at the complex legacy of General Sani Abacha, especially during his 5-year reign as head of state and commander-in-chief of the Armed Forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Please come with me, Gabriel here. This is a two-part video combined into one. In the first part of this video, we'll explain General Sani Abacha's legacy as a repressive dictator and megalomaniac, while in the second part of the video, we explain why he is seen by many as a hero and the best Nigerian head of state ever. But first, born on the 20th of September 1943, Sani Abacha was originally a Kanuri from Borno State, but was born and raised in Kano, northwestern Nigeria. He was commissioned into the Nigerian Army in 1963 after he had attended a Mons Defense Officers Cadet Training College in Aldershot, England. But before then, Sani Abacha had attended the Nigerian Military Training College in Kaduna State. Just 3 years into his commission in the army, Abacha took part in the conceptual stages of the Northern Counter-Coup of July 1966. He is also alleged to have participated in the Lagos or Abeokuta phases of the January 1966 coup. Abacha rose through the ranks to a full general in the army without skipping a single rank and was regarded by many as a master coup planner and executioner. When the crisis of June 12 arose in 1993, Babangida stepped aside and set up an interim national government headed by Chief Ernest Shunekon. But Babangida left behind General Sani Abacha as defense minister. This was more or less a setup for the ING. As expected, less than 3 months into the life of the ING, on 17th of November 1993, General Sani Abacha forced Shunekon to resign. Abacha installed himself as head of state and commander-in-chief of the Armed Forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. This would mark the beginning of his 5-year reign. Kindly take a moment to book the like button on this video and subscribe to History Media. Thank you. During his 5-year rule over Nigeria, General Sani Abacha left behind arguably one of the worst records of brutality in the history of the country. He represented the climax of all that was wrong with the Nigerian military's monopoly of power since independence in 1960 to that time. But was everything about his regime all bad? I'll come back to that in a moment. But first, even though his military predecessors were known to be high-handed and brutal, General Sani Abacha appeared to be the most brutal and most insecure of all. His insecurity was such that Abacha hardly traveled out of the new capital Abuja to visit other parts of the country. And whenever he dared do so, it was for very brief moments. He was very secretive and became highly unpopular. Sani Abacha spent enormous resources on the State Security Service and his carefully selected strike force, and enabled them to mount extensive surveillance on prominent Nigerians, whether they were civilians or military, especially those whom the regime felt uncomfortable with. By this means, he had begun to create a real sense of distrust among Nigerians. They became afraid to discuss politics openly, an activity that has been their pastime since political independence. Under Abacha's regime, complaining publicly was a basis for arrest and prolonged detention without trial. Academics and journalists were often seized in their homes at midnight and put into prolonged detention without trial. In an effort to completely silence criticism and opposition, General Sani Abacha suspended the Nigerian right of legal defense. He banned all forms of political protest, destroyed the trade unions, and systematically clamped all suspected opponents into prison. Those imprisoned were subjected to very harsh conditions. By the time of Abacha's sudden death, the list of Nigerians in prison looked inexhaustible. The list included members of trade unions, journalists, academics, and other vocal professionals, human rights advocates, and even military men whom the regime distrusted. Worse still, political opponents frequently disappeared, while others were gunned down in broad daylight. Two notable examples were the assassination of Abiola, the vocal wife of Chief Moshood Abiola, and Chief Alfred Rewani. Despite paying lip service, the government showed little or no interest in investigating these murders. At this time, a reign of terror was fully in place. But it did not stop there. General Sani Abacha intended to destroy all institutions of democracy and justice in the country. On August 24, 1994, the military government promulgated decrees which put its actions beyond legal challenge in the courts. His target on the judiciary also included intimidation and appointment of cronies into the Supreme Court. The regime constantly disregarded court orders as well. Because of General Sani Abacha's insecurity, he surrounded himself with sycophant heads who never told him any bad news. In addition to his domestic economic mismanagement, General Sani Abacha's disregard for international public opinion made Nigeria a pariah state. Two key decisions of the regime brought this to the fore. First, the execution of Ken Saro-Wiwa and 8 other Ogonis, and second, the trump-up charges of subversion and treason against a respected former head of state, General Olusegun Obasanjo, and his former deputy, General Shehu Musa Yar'Adua. Yar'Adua eventually died in prison of suspected poisoning. On December 11, 1995, a meeting between Abacha and the American unofficial envoy, Representative Bill Richardson, confirmed that Abacha was oblivious of his administration's reputation abroad. He asked Abacha, quote, "Think of your role in history," and reminded him, quote, "You are known as a murderer of Ken Saro-Wiwa." Abacha's final step in destroying the chances of genuine democracy in Nigeria was to invade civil society through a massive misuse of public funds. He bought up traditional rulers and financed endless spontaneous solidarity public rallies. For those rallies, jobless youths and intimidated public servants were transported to state capitals in order to pledge their support for the general. This happened almost every other week. They presented petitions calling for Abacha to remain as president. For instance, on March 25, 1997, Lagos State Obas and leading chiefs rather infamously declared support for Abacha's government at a public rally. Participants in these rallies presented their solidarity messages to the ever-ready and ever-welcoming state military administrators. However, at the same time, public protests by ordinary citizens were not allowed in any part of the country. Those that took place against all threats by the police were brutally put down. As General Sani Abacha consolidated his grip on power, the list of political detainees grew as long as the list of prominent Nigerians who had fled into self-exile. On the 12th of March 1997, the government placed charges of treason on Anthony Nahoro, Chief Olufalaye, Professor Wolu Soyinka, General Kinrinade, and others. Meanwhile, the regime had begun preparation for democratic transition. On December 12, 1995, an 8-member National Electoral Commission of Nigeria, NECON, was inaugurated. The next day, Abacha set up a Transition Implementation Committee, TIC, to supervise the transition process. Almost a year later, on September 30, 1996, NECON announced the registration of 5 political parties under stiff guidelines. Between April 16 to 28, 1998, all but one of the 5 registered political parties adopted Abacha as consensus candidate for the presidential elections. However, on May 1, 1998, United Action for Democracy (UAD) organized a public protest against the adoption of Abacha as consensus candidate. But the protest was brutally put down and 7 people were killed in the process. 4 days later, the European Union officially declared Nigeria's transition to civil rule program a failure. Abacha was working tirelessly to transmute himself into the next civilian president. He had the ambition to rule Nigeria at least until 2010, the year of his Vision 2010. By 1998, Chief M.K. Abiola, who was arrested in 1994 after declaring himself president, was still in detention. But his shadow loomed so large that General Sani Abacha had to transfer him to a personal prison right within Aso Rock in Abuja. Sources close to the seat of power whispered that Abacha kept him under his personal surveillance so that he could take him hostage in case of any unforeseen military eventuality. Abiola was never released and eventually died in detention about a month after Abacha had died. Sani Abacha's paranoia became so obsessive that he trusted not even his own generals. With the help of the SSS and members of his strike force, he had a plan to implicate important elements in his regime, including his own deputy, Lieutenant General Diya, in a stage-managed coup plot. Most of those implicated were from the Yoruba tribe. Analysts believe Abacha used agent provocateurs to lure them into participating in a coup, which he then videotaped at all critical stages. Having succeeded in trapping his former military collaborators whom he distrusted, 61 persons in all, including officers and civilians, were arrested and tried by a military tribunal for treason. After the trials, Lieutenant General Diya and 5 others were condemned to death. But that was not all. Corruption was also a thing under Abacha. Abacha's regime was said to be very corrupt. During his regime, everything about Nigeria's oil wealth was centralized in the presidency. It is alleged that government revenue was recklessly spent in blind pursuit of personal power. In spite of loud noises about prudence in budgeting, the regime incurred a domestic debt of about 15.5 billion naira worth of treasury bills in 1997 alone. In fact, the total outstanding domestic debt increased from 221.8 billion naira in 1996 to 359.03 billion naira in 1997. It is said that little of these resources were spent on visible projects that would improve the welfare of the citizens. Rather, the money was siphoned away as kickbacks and used to line the pockets of soldiers and political agents. To this day, the Nigerian government still recovers millions of dollars stashed in foreign banks abroad, belonging to him, his cronies, or his family members. In total, Abacha is alleged to have stolen between $3 to $5 billion from Nigeria. At that time, Transparency International listed Abacha as the 4th most corrupt leader in the world. Consequently, within 5 years of his administration, the economy was in trouble. Indeed, prolonged period of fuel scarcity in 1998 further worsened the situation for Nigerians and even affected the economy adversely. But was General Sani Abacha's regime all bad as portrayed so far? Well, in November 1993, when General Sani Abacha came into power, Nigeria was confronted with the challenges of democracy, federalism, corruption, governance, and aggressive ethno-regionalism. To tackle these nation-building challenges, the Abacha regime, like other military regimes before him, adopted decrees and edicts, as well as constitutional and institutional reforms. But the issue of democracy and constitutional reform were urgent following the impasse created by the June 12 annulment. Arising from these crises and the various calls for an end to military rule, the Abacha administration convened a National Constitutional Conference (NCC) on June 26, 1994. The conference was meant to articulate an institutional arrangement capable of laying a solid foundation for a viable, cohesive, and functional Nigeria. General Sani Abacha charged the conference delegate to fashion a conscious culture of national consensus conceived in the broadest sense. The administration also established a National Constitutional Commission to facilitate the affairs of the conference. In addition, the work of the conference was to serve as an important plank for the transition to civil rule program of the administration. At the end of the conference, some important recommendations were made. 1. That the presidency should be rotated between the North and the South. 2nd, that representation at the federal and sub-federal levels must be based on proportionality. 3rd, that the Federal Character Commission was to be established. And finally, they also approved multi-party democracy for the 4th Republic. It is remarkable to note that some of these recommendations were later adopted in the 4th Republic after Abacha's death in 1998. At that time, one of the challenges that required urgent attention was the issue of ethno-regionalism and its overbearing influence on the structure of Nigeria. Minority ethnic nationalities who have over the years been lorded over by the majority in their state clamored for a unique identity for themselves. The need to address these minority concerns from different corners of the country became very urgent. To address these concerns, one of the recommendations of the NCC was the creation of new states. Consequently, on October 1, 1996, the government created 6 additional states, including Ebonyi from Abia State and Enugu states. Bayelsa State was created from Rivers State, Nasarawa State was created from Plateau State, Gombe State was created from Bauchi, and Ekiti from Ondo State. In addition, 138 local government areas were also created. This now brought the total number of states in Nigeria to 36 states plus the FCT, while the number of local government areas across the country stands at 774. Apart from minority concerns, the creation of states and local government areas was to ensure that governance, both at the national and subnational levels, was extended to the grassroots. Abacha also oversaw the reorganization of Nigeria into the current 6 geopolitical zones in order to reflect cultural, economic, and political realities of the regions. But that is not all. To tackle the challenge of democracy, Abacha promulgated a series of transition to civil rule decrees between 1994 and 1995 that would have ensured the enthronement of democracy in Nigeria. The decrees included the Constitutional Conference Election Committee Decree 1994, the Constitutional Conference Decree 1995, and the Constitutional Conference Dissolution Decree of 1995. In October 1995, the state launched its Transition to Civil Rule program with the Transition to Civil Rule Decree 1995. According to the transition program, the regime planned to return to democracy by 1998. And the transition program was divided into 9 phases, some of which included the establishment of a new electoral commission for Nigeria, the creation of new states and local government areas, the registration of political parties, the production of authentic voter register, and the setting up of state electoral tribunals. On December 12, 1995, an 8-member National Electoral Commission of Nigeria known as NECON was inaugurated. The next day, Abacha set up a Transition Implementation Committee (TIC) to supervise the transition process. Almost a year later, on September 30, 1996, NECON announced the registration of 5 political parties under stiff guidelines. Between April 16 and 28, 1998, all but one of the 5 registered political parties adopted Abacha as consensus candidate for the presidential elections. This, however, led Chief Bola Ige to describe the parties as 5 fingers of a leprous hand. In 1996, the Abacha regime established by Decree No. 34 of 1996 the Federal Character Commission. The commission had powers to work out a formula for the redistribution of jobs and to establish the principle of proportionality, among other things. The commission also had the powers to prosecute head of ministries and parastatals for failing to carry out its instructions. It was further empowered to address the inequalities in social services and infrastructural development. For example, Based on the idea behind the establishment of the commission, Abacha's Provisional Ruling Council, the PRC, was reorganized to include members from across the 6 geopolitical divides. The Federal Character Commission is still prominent in Nigeria today, though nepotism and impunity by government officials has become institutionalized in the last decade or so, making the commission largely ineffective. In October 1994, the government removed subsidy on petroleum and increased fuel prices. But the regime promised to put the extra revenue into a special account that will be used to rehabilitate public facilities across the country. Consequently, using Decree No. 25 of 1994, the Petroleum Special Trust Fund (PTF) was established. The mandate of the PTF ranged from supplying medications to public hospitals, building or repairing roads, schools, renovation of university halls across the country, and providing boreholes to communities. However, in spite of its laudable aims, the PTF failed to fulfill its important mission before it was scrapped by the Obasanjo administration in 2000. The Abacha regime also established the National Human Rights Commission of Nigeria using Decree No. 22 of 1995. But the commission started operation in June 1996 and served as an extrajudicial mechanism for the respect and enjoyment of human rights. However, during the Abacha's regime, prominent civil rights activists were jailed and civil rights organizations were proscribed. It is important to remind us that apart from constitutional and institutional reforms, the Abacha regime was able to undertake some laudable or notable projects during its almost 5 years rule. On February 18, 1996, the government awarded a contract for the construction of the National Assembly Complex in Abuja. In the same vein, Gwarimpa Housing Estate was designed and built by the regime of General Sani Abacha, while the Federal Medical Center (PIDA) and some others were built during Abacha government in 1997. The regime is credited with the construction of the National Hospital Abuja, Women and Children Hospital Sokoto, Aminu Kano Hospital Kano, Apo Legislative Quarters, and many other projects. Abacha is also credited with the construction of between 25 and 100 kilometers of urban road in major cities such as Kano, Gusau, Benin, Funtua, Zaria, Enugu, Kaduna, Aba, Lagos, Lokoja, and Port Harcourt. In another development, Abacha's administration oversaw an increase in the country's foreign exchange reserve from $494 million in 1993 to $9.6 billion by the middle of 1997, and reduced the external debt of Nigeria from $36 billion in 1993 to about $27 billion by 1997. Abacha has refused IMF advice to take foreign loans. Between 1993 and 1998, the regime reduced the inflation rate from 54% inherited from the interim national government to about 8.5% at the time oil prices were hovering around $15. Within this period, however, Nigeria's domestic debt rose sharply from 221.8 billion naira in 1996 to 359.03 billion naira in 1997. And finally, long before he became president, Sani Abacha was one of a few senior military officers who rose to the occasion to defend the Babangida regime during the Gideon Orkar coup in 1990. Babangida's initial suspicion was that Abacha was behind the coup. At first, when General Sani Abacha telephoned him, he refused to disclose his hiding place. When it became clear that Abacha was only fighting to sustain his regime, Babangida never joked with him afterwards. From that moment, Babangida referred to Abacha as a Khalifa, meaning the successor. That was the reason why he left Abacha behind as defense minister when he set up the interim national government. He had the option to retire him, knowing fully well his ability to plan and execute military coups. By mid-1998, Nigeria under Abacha had attained a terrible image of gross human rights violations. Most Nigerians had begun to lose hope in their country and turned to prayers. For this group of people, Sani Abacha's sudden death was evidence that God answers prayers, and his death was greeted with spontaneous celebration across the country. So, What is your thought on this? Do you know any good side of General Sani Abacha that is not included in this video? Let us know in the comment section. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you in the other one. Thank you very much for watching. Peace.